Okay, Hayden, so there's a lot to talk about here. I'm assuming that this is your first attempt at something like this, at like this big of a score. There are a lot of things that don't work here, and of course, I really want people to be generous towards our developing orchestrators in the comments of these videos, and not just, especially don't compare people who are just giving things a first or second try to those who are more experienced, okay? Because that's just really not fair at all. Everybody starts somewhere, so, this is actually a pretty good start. There are a lot of things worked out here. Hayden is thinking about, like the tuning of the timpani and trying to limit himself to just, to several to 4 or 5 different kettles rather than having 6 or 7 or 8. And some of that is worked out, but the overall orchestration needs a ton of work. Okay, and right here, I'm sure that a lot of people caught that just listening to the mock-up just now, and also looking at the handling of the melody. So the first thing is that there were a lot of wrong notes in the melody line, and maybe that was a result of attempting to transcribe the melody onto the bass clarinet part by just by sight in a transposing way. So, if that was the case, then you got a lot of notes right, but then there were still a lot wrong. It would have been easier just to take the piano part, that the template, and just to peel off the melody line in the first voice and drop it onto the bass clarinet part if you had wanted to. Okay, so I know some really good bass players. In fact, I know some of the best bass clarinet players in the world. I would say Andrew Uren, who played the clarinet parts for my Orchestration 104 course. That is one of the best bass clarinetists around. He's just as phenomenal. He studied bass clarinet from like one of the top teachers in The Hague, and he's just really, really great. Now, he could play this, but your average section player could not. They would look at that high note and they would just say, look, why is that not a clarinet part? And the honest truth is that you could be trading off. You've got so many winds doing things here that you could be trading off to a clarinet if you just really wanted that. But another thing that is true is that the bass clarinet is not playing a note that could not be played by a regular clarinet, right? You start off with this G flat here, which would be sounding down a ninth, right? Okay. Well, the thing is that, like, that's also possible. This note, just, sound written note down here, G flat below the staff, is very easy for a standard clarinet. And then the top note up here is no big deal at all, right, for that player. All right, so that's the first thing, is just really sending the bass clarinet way out of range like this. And then, when you look at the other things at play here, we've got glockenspiel plus piccolo, which is a really cool idea, but it sets up like a 2-octave difference between the bass clarinet and the piccolo, and it might not work as well as you think that it's going to. I mean, I think it's really cool that you have got you've got these harmonies. It seems to me that you really worked on your textures a lot more than you worked on your melodic content. And for all that, it's not too badly scored, in terms of the harmony and so on. So I don't want to pick apart the harmony endlessly, but there are a lot of these a lot of these unisons of, like, say, B flat plus B sharp really should be like B flat plus C, because the B sharp isn't really a functional note in the way that this chord is scored, right? Or A sharp plus B sharp, right? If you're thinking in terms of um, the enharmonic equivalent. Yeah, so I'm noticing that I'm clearing my throat again. One of my supporters told me, like, oh well, I hope your sore throat gets better. Well, I don't have a sore throat. It's just that I'm getting up at 6 a.m. sometimes earlier to do these evaluations before it gets noisy in the house, and then the other problem is that I'm doing a ton of them, so I just really have to pace myself. It's not that I'm sick or anything, even though I sound a little congested, but I just, that is the time of year here. It is late fall in New Zealand. It might be late spring everywhere else, but it's late fall here, and so, there's just dust and and so on in the air. So just bear with me, everybody, all right? Okay, so this is actually not too bad of a chord. I would just say that, like, that you're going to run into difficulties with the horns sitting on top of the flutes, right? Like, and basically overlaying the other winds. So if that is the case, then just really, like, the winds become kind of non-functional, right? So, like, if this was marked piano, if there were some balancing, then I could go with you. But even at that, to pull off this high F at a real pianissimo, at like an honest pianissimo compared to the rest of the orchestra, would be a lot of work for your player. I mean, a good player can do it, but it still is just, it's not the greatest horn writing, okay, in terms of the scope of what you're trying to do here. But, the strings are nice. I like that you're not overdoing it. I'm not seeing a ton of unworkable double stops and so on and so forth. It all seems to be pretty good. Okay, so, one of the other things that we're dealing with here are just really huge, rich textures when you have melody instruments playing in places where they will just get swamped by the timbre. Okay, so you still have your horns fairly high here. That is like sounding F above middle C. And horns tend to have this kind of this resonance. They don't have really high complex overtones, but they do have a really strong overtone in their of the first, second, and third partials, right? So what I like to call the body of the tone, if you've read 100 More Orchestration Tips. And that can just really overwhelm the other instruments around it, right? So you just really have to be careful with stuff like this. And there are definitely some moments in this orchestration where the playback is, in the playback the melody is inaudible. So and that is for real. The balance is telling you the right thing there. All right. Okay. Clarinets, oboes supporting the melody. It's not too bad in here. And suddenly we just get really slow, as we go on through the rest of this piece. So I feel that that's a little out of character for the music. But you're keeping your textures very light, bum, 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 with pizzicato and the flutes and everything else. And then here, just a little echo. See, that's kind of nice. All right. So I'm not sure why you've got these commas in here, these pausa marks. So like that would generally be like take a breath, or it could even mean to like draw out the ending of a bar, which in that case they should all be right here, right? So I'm not sure why they are put where they are put. Okay, and then bum 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 bum. Now, once again, this is all playable by the violins, but I'm just not sure that it is a great idea to have the violins up there all by themselves playing harmony under the piccolo, right? It's I don't feel that that's very strong. The piccolo will tend to kind of overwhelm the violins. It might be better to have the two playing in unison in some way, or just to have everything lower, because I don't think you really need the really high sheen to everything all the time. Okay, but as far as this is concerned, not too bad. I mean, there's a lot more. I could pick a lot of this stuff apart and really go to town on it, but I don't have time for that, right? Because there's so much to cover. I'm only giving myself about 20 minutes on these semi-brev evaluations. All right, so let's turn the page. And now here from A, I think that there was really a big problem in conveying the melody. So here we've got clarinets and flutes playing together, and really, you know, yes, you're trying to balance things. You're trying to control everything so that the lower flute part can come out. But honestly speaking, this is, if you want things to sound loud enough to be heard, you just cannot use a low flute right in here. All right. I mean, this is there are a lot of approaches in here that I think, Hayden, you should really look at like some of the other challenge entries over the years and get a general sense of the kinds of things that work and don't, right? Because this is something, the positioning of the flute too low is something that just happens a lot in these entry scores and doesn't really work in complex scoring. Like, you're really trying to have this heavily textured music here. I really like the combination of bassoons and horns right in here. This is really nice. And then you throw in the trumpets there. I mean, that's all real fun. But the melody it can't be heard in the mock-up, and it won't be heard in a live orchestra reading of this. Now here you do not have to indicate down bow at all, right? Don't indicate bowings for your players unless there really is an effect that you want. Now if you wanted these to be down bows, then I would say that's fine. But they know that this is going to be down bow. Do you know what I mean? Or they might actually look at it and say, hey, I would actually like to start on an up bow here because of something that you don't know about, right? So just don't mark bowings for your musicians. Mark slurs, absolutely, but don't mark bowings. Okay, and bum 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 bum. And once again, here we have a pausa, comma, and we also have the short fermata. So I just don't know. I mean, dun 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 dun, and then what happens here? You have reduced your tempo. Poco ritardando. So are you going to just stay slow? And that's what happens in the playback. Da da dum bum 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 bum. It really stays. So it kind of takes the. I mean, I know this really isn't about the playback at all. It's really about the orchestration. But yeah. Okay, so here, really huge, rich texture, and now you can finally hear the melody because it is, it is part of the top line of all of this intensely harmonized music. Okay, but once again, you're throwing the piccolo in there. Like the piccolo is playing all the time. I think you're going to wear out people's ears by just having piccolo on the top line. I mean, it's beautiful, but it really does, and it just does not. It kind of takes away the specialness of your texture here. Just to be perfectly frank about it. Yeah. So I mean, this really is a massive approach right in here, and you really worked a lot of chords out, and I think that that's great. Once again, we've got this enharmonic thing. Like, I mean, sharps or flats, right? You got to sort of have to decide because like there's a functionality to the harmony that you need to follow. Um, yeah. Okay, and then just list this little roll in here. That's kind of fun. Now here, like here saying divisi upper arco lower pizz. So like the lower pizzicato should just be like a quarter note, right? Because it's not going to last. I mean, maybe at the most your pizzicato on the double basses could last maybe 2 beats or 3 beats, but not four, I don't think. I mean, they can be sort of like really trying to get the note to stay going. Like sometimes that happens with some double bassists playing a vibrato. I think the vibrato to try to keep the note the string vibrating. Okay, but yeah. Okay, so unison arco soli, and then once again in the playback you cannot hear the melody, and that is for real, right? I think I think you just need to like if you're going to do real thickly textured stuff, you need to have more doubling, right? So if this line here were actually the clarinet line, and then this were the bass clarinet line, like so you've got them functioning together, right? And then you had those doubled by say like second violin and cello, then I think it would come through really nicely against those horns, right? But horns just swamp everything. And then when you add the heavy brass, then forget it. Nobody is going to be able to hear this harp right in here, no matter how delicately you try to balance it. I mean, even like look, horns are loud, right? And you didn't mark diminuendo on the third and fourth horn. Yeah, here you. It's funny. Here you've got your third and fourth playing above your first and second, and not to say that you couldn't do that. I mean, there are definitely places if you have horns tuned to different crooks in natural playing, then you'll often see the third and fourth playing higher than the first and second in terms of written notes, but they still might be playing lower. Yeah, just a little strange. This should be reversed. I would want my first violinist, my first hornist on the top E flat here, just because they are going to have the best lip and they're going to be the most in control. Whereas actually the third might have the biggest risk of playing too loudly, just because the third is sort of like your he's like your or he they are like your stallion that is like just wanting to get out there. They are a principal player in training, or they are the substitute hotshot, right? And they want to get out there and just play. So I'm not saying that third players can't play sensitively, but it's just that they would be the player that would be the most likely to play slightly too loud. If that were ever a concern. So right in here, I would definitely switch the positions of the players. Okay, and then we go to this. I think you were trying to get something really beautiful and delicate going here, but really, if you want harmonics to stand out against a texture, everybody else would pretty much better be pianissimo. Okay? And then this kind of doesn't mean anything, like unless you are bowing. You are playing, like, you're playing this note. It's tied. It's F natural, going for 4 beats. But there's no way to make your glockenspiel diminuendo. It just holds, right? So it's better just to mark a single dynamic and then just let it hold and don't worry about everything else, because the player will look at this and say, "What, do you want me to bow it or something?" Because like with a bow, you could get different effects, but even at that, bowed glockenspiel has less. It has less dynamic variation than you would think. There's a tendency to just go with the bow, right? And it's kind of more of a stroke that builds in dynamic intensity and then just sort of lifts off at the end. Okay, and there are ways to be less obvious than that, but yeah. I mean, I see what you're trying to do here with a lot of these things, and it's very cool, but you've got these harmonies at the end. You were trying harmonics at the end. You're trying a lot of really cool effects and so on. But yeah, and once again, you've got these incredibly high notes from bass clarinet and piano, right? I mean, it would be hard for a good, like a world class bass clarinet player to get down to a piano on a high written A. That would really, I mean, you've got your clarinets not doing anything once again, and so they could be handling this with the utmost of sensitivity. Just there are a lot of bass, but maybe you're a bass clarinet specialist. I don't want to speak for you. If that is a note that's really easy for you, and then you've got these just really sky high notes here in the bassoon that could be covered easily by oboe and played extremely softly, right? Yeah, you're going mezzo forte to a high D here, and then this B is going down to a piano. So it's going to sound awkward. I mean, the players will give you their best, but it's not going to sound that great. So this would have to be this really is like oboe material from right around here. Okay, so some cool things. You gave me a lot to talk about, Hayden, so don't feel bad if I've just really picked your work apart, but just try to learn from the different suggestions and the different things. I think you were taking on a lot here past your experience, and that is not necessarily a bad thing if you are willing to listen to the critique and to understand that there will be a lot to talk about, right? Anyhow, very, very cool. Really enjoyed looking at this, and a really great way for me to start my evaluations for today. So thank you for that, and thank you so much for supporting on Patreon. And now on to the next entry.